Keep it. My nephew's fiancée slid the envelope back across the table without even opening it. She didn't look up from her phone when she said it. We appreciate the thought, but honestly, Aunt Dorothy, you really didn't have to. She said my name the way people say a street address they've never been to before. Like she wasn't sure it was real. My nephew Marcus was standing right there. He looked at me, then at her, then back at me. He didn't say anything. He just reached for his champagne glass and turned toward the window. I picked up the envelope. I put it in my purse. I smiled at the people around the table who had seen the whole thing, and I excused myself to get some air. That was the night of Marcus's medical school graduation party. The night his fiancée's father looked at my hands, the rough skin, the calluses, the small scars from decades of needles and scissors, and asked me what I did for a living. When I told him I ran Alterations at Henderson's dry cleaning on Birchwood Avenue, he nodded the way people nod when they're already thinking about something else. "How sweet," he said. "Marcus always speaks so fondly of his family." He said family the way you'd say quaint. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I have worked with my hands my entire life, and I have never once been ashamed of that. My mother worked with her hands, her mother before her. There is dignity in making things fit, in taking something broken or ill-shaped and returning it to what it was supposed to be. I have altered wedding dresses and burial suits. I have let out seams for women who just had babies and taken in seams for women who had just lost their husbands and stopped eating. I have been trusted with the most important garments of people's most important days for 31 years. But none of that mattered to the people in that room. What mattered to them was the zip code I drove in from, and the car I drove in, and the envelope I brought instead of a wire transfer. Let me back up. Let me tell you who Marcus is to me. My sister Linda passed when Marcus was 9 years old. A brain aneurysm, sudden and total and without any warning on a Tuesday morning while she was making coffee. Her husband Ray was a decent man but not a strong one, and he came apart after she died in a way that left Marcus essentially parentless before he was in middle school. I was the one who drove him to school when Ray was too deep in whatever bottle he was visiting that week. I was the one who showed up to his science fair projects and his JV basketball games and his high school graduation. I was the one who sat with him in the financial aid office at the state university and helped him understand the loan documents and made sure he signed the right ones. I was not his mother. I know that. I was never trying to be his mother. But I loved that boy the way you love something you helped keep alive when it had every reason to stop. When he got into medical school, I cried for 20 minutes in the parking lot of Henderson's before I could drive home. I did not tell him what I did after that. I did not tell anyone. This was 11 years ago. Marcus had just been accepted. I had been working at Henderson's for 20 years by then, and the previous owner, a man named Gerald Henderson, had been talking for 2 years about wanting to retire. Gerald was 74 and his knees were failing, and his wife Patrice wanted to move to Sarasota. We had spoken carefully and honestly about what the shop meant to me and what it might be worth to me someday. Gerald was not a greedy man. He gave me a fair price and a long runway, and he shook my hand and told me Patrice was already looking at condos. I did not take out a loan. I had been saving since I was 22 years old. Not in any exciting way. Not in any way anyone around me would have understood or believed. I simply lived smaller than I earned. Every single year. For decades. I cooked at home. I drove my cars until they stopped moving. I took one vacation in 11 years, 4 days in Gatlinburg with my friend Carol, and we split the cabin rental. I put every surplus dollar into accounts that earned interest, and then accounts that earned more interest, and then, when I started to understand what I was doing, into things that compounded quietly while I was at work, not talking about them. By the time Gerald was ready to sell, I had enough to buy Henderson's outright. The building it occupied had come on the market 2 years earlier, when the original owner died and his children couldn't agree on what to do with it. I bought that too. I want to be precise here, because precision matters, and because people in stories like this are always accused of exaggerating. The building on Birchwood Avenue is a 3-story commercial property, 11,000 square feet, with ground floor retail and 6 office suites on the upper floors. I bought it for $412,000 in 2014. By the night of Marcus's graduation party, the assessed value had more than tripled. I had also, over the years, purchased 2 additional properties, a small strip of retail on Clement Street and a 6-unit residential building on Aldine Park, and reinvested steadily enough that my financial advisor, a quiet, serious woman named Patricia, had started calling me quarterly instead of annually. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you this because the woman Amanda's father dismissed as quaint was sitting on more assets than most people in that restaurant would see in 2 lifetimes. And I had spent 31 years making sure no one around me knew it. Why? Because my mother taught me to be private about money the same way she taught me to be private about grief. Both things, she said, made people behave badly toward you if they knew. She was right about both. Now, back to the party. The party was held at a restaurant called Ardmore, which Amanda's parents had reserved in full for the evening. There were white tablecloths and a string quartet and a signature cocktail they had named after Marcus, something involving gin and elderflower that I tasted once and set down. Amanda's father, whose name was Richard, had made his money in commercial real estate and wanted everyone in the room to be aware of this. He shook hands firmly and referenced square footage the way other people reference the weather. Amanda herself was not a bad person. I want to be careful to say that. She was 29, extremely pretty, accustomed to a particular kind of life, and almost entirely without curiosity about people who lived differently. She wasn't cruel the way villains in stories are cruel. She was indifferent in a way that I think she didn't even know was a wound. When she slid that envelope back to me, she was not thinking about my feelings. She was not thinking about me at all. That was the thing. "We're doing a registry and a honeymoon fund," she said, still not looking up from her phone. "I'll send you the links. There's a cruise package we really love." The cruise package started at $8,000 per couple. I nodded. I said thank you. I put the envelope in my purse, the one I had carried for 6 years because it was good leather and well made, and I saw no reason to replace it. And I went to get some air. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk in front of Ardmore and looked at the street. It was a warm June night. Across from me, a couple was walking a dog that was trying to eat something off the curb. A cab idled at the corner. Everything was ordinary, and I was standing in it feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not humiliated. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was decided. Before we go any further, have you ever done something quietly, for years, and never asked for acknowledgement, and been fine with that, until the moment someone looked directly at you and saw nothing? And in that moment you realized that what you had been calling humility was actually just invisibility, and that there was a difference? That was the feeling. That was the night I stopped being invisible. Not loudly, quietly. The way I did everything. I went back inside. I finished the evening. I hugged Marcus and told him I was proud of him, which was true. I told Amanda she looked beautiful, which was also true. I drove home. The next morning, I called Patricia. "I need to restructure a few things," I said. Patricia, who knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying, asked a careful question. "Is this about Marcus?" "It's about clarity," I said. "I want everything very clear. The building on Birchwood Avenue, the one where Henderson's dry cleaning occupied, the ground floor also housed, on its second floor, a suite of medical offices. Suite 201. For the past 8 months, Marcus had been in conversations with me, though he did not know I was the building owner, because Henderson's was held under an LLC, and I had never explained this to him about taking that suite for his new family practice. He had been put in touch with the property manager, a woman named Gail who worked for me, and Gail had quoted him a very favorable rate because I had told her to. The lease had not yet been signed. I called Gail after I called Patricia. "The Suite 201 discussions," I said, "put them on pause." Gail was a professional. She didn't ask why. "Of course," she said. "Do you want me to reach out to the other interested party?" There was another interested party. A podiatry practice that had been inquiring about the space for 4 months. I had been holding them off for Marcus. "Yes," I said. "Let's move forward with them." I also called a man named Bernard, who managed a small portfolio fund I had contributed to for 9 years. The fund had a seat on the advisory board of Lakeview Medical Group, which was the hospital system where Marcus had just accepted a residency and where he was planning to build the early part of his career. I was one of 12 individual investors. I had never attended a board meeting. I had sent my proxy votes by mail and otherwise said nothing. "Bernard," I said, "I'd like to attend the next advisory meeting in person." A long pause. "Dorothy," he said, "is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I just think it's time I showed up. Now, here is what I need you to understand. I was not plotting against Marcus. I was not trying to destroy him. I want that to be absolutely clear, because I have thought about this a great deal since then, and I know where the line is, and I know I didn't cross it. What I was doing was removing myself as a silent safety net. I was stopping, for the first time in 11 years, the practice of quietly engineering advantages for someone who had just watched his fiancée hand me back an envelope without looking at me and done nothing. There is a difference between revenge and withdrawal. I was withdrawing. It felt the same from the outside, I suppose, but I knew what it was. 3 weeks passed. Marcus called me twice, both times about wedding logistics. Could I help coordinate with his father's side of the family? Could I call his cousin Darlene, who was being difficult about the rehearsal dinner? I helped. I called Darlene. I was gracious and present and said nothing about any of it. Then one evening my phone rang and it was Marcus, and his voice was different. "Aunt Dorothy," he said, "I need to talk to you about something." The suite had gone to the podiatry practice. Gail had sent a formal notice, and Marcus had apparently called the property management number and been told the decision was final. He had done some research and found that the building was owned by something called Birchwood Holdings, LLC. He had searched the name and come to a dead end. He was calling me because I was the person he called when he came to dead ends. "Who owns Birchwood Holdings?" he asked. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the neighbors' kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk. The light was doing that thing it does in early July when it slants and goes gold. "I do," I said. The silence on his end lasted a long time, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "You," he said finally. "I bought the building in 2014. I wanted to offer you the space at a good rate to help you get started. I had Gail pull the listing when I decided to let the other tenant in. Why would you—" He stopped. Started again. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you asked me directly," I said. I always answer when I'm asked directly. Another long pause. And then, slowly, carefully, like a man who was beginning to understand that a room he thought he knew very well had a door in it he had never noticed. "Is there anything else I don't know, Aunt Dorothy?" I thought about the fund. I thought about the Clement Street property and the Aldine Park building. I thought about the account at First Meridian that had been quietly growing since Ronald Reagan was president. "We should have coffee," I said. "There are some things I should have told you a long time ago." We had coffee 2 days later, at my kitchen table, the same one where I had helped him with his financial aid forms 11 years ago. I put out the good cups, the ones my mother left me, the ones with the small blue flowers around the rim. I made the coffee strong the way he liked it, and I told him, I did not perform it. I did not make it dramatic. I went through things plainly, the way you read through a document, making sure each line was understood before moving to the next. The properties, the accounts, the fund, and what the fund was connected to, the approximate total, which caused him to set down his coffee cup and stare at the table for a full minute without speaking. "How?" he said, not asking how it was possible, asking how he had not known. "I didn't talk about it," I said. "Money makes people behave badly. My mother told me that. For 30 years, you—" 31, I said. "At Henderson's." "Yes." He looked at me the way people look at an optical illusion when they finally see the other image. Like the surface of things had shifted, and what was underneath was entirely different from what they had believed. "The night of the graduation party," he said. He didn't finish the sentence. "You don't need to say it." "Amanda, she doesn't know me," I said. "She saw what was in front of her, and she made a judgment. That's human. I'm not angry at her. But you pulled the sweet." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. "I spent 11 years being your silent cushion," I said, as gently as I could. "Driving you places, showing up, holding things together. I never asked you to acknowledge any of it, and I don't regret any of it. But that night, I sat at a table and watched someone dismiss me completely, and you turned to the window." I looked at him steadily. "That was the part that mattered, Marcus. Not her. You. He didn't defend himself. That was how I knew the boy I had driven to science fairs was still in there somewhere. I'm sorry, he said. I know you are. What happens now? I thought about that question. Outside my kitchen window, a squirrel was doing something aggressive to the bird feeder I had put up in May. The coffee was cooling. Everything in the room was ordinary and mine. Now, I said, you go home. You think about what kind of partner you want to be and what kind of man you want to be, and you make those decisions clearly, without me arranging things quietly in the background. You don't need a safety net. You graduated medical school. You are more capable than you know. I paused. And if Amanda is the right person for you, she should know who your family actually is. All of it. Not the version that fits on a place card. He was quiet. Then he said, Are you coming to the wedding? I haven't decided, I said honestly. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He helped me with the cups, the way he always had since he was a boy, rinsing them in the sink, stacking them carefully on the drying rack. At the door he stopped and looked back at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Aunt Dorothy, he said. The envelope. What was in it? I smiled at him. Enough, I said. It was always enough. He left. I stood in my kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular. Then I went and got the envelope from my purse, where I had been keeping it since the night of the party. I opened it at my kitchen table with the good cups still drying in the rack. Inside was a passbook. Old format, printed, the kind most banks don't issue anymore. The account had been opened in Marcus's name the month he started medical school. Every year, quietly, I had made a deposit. The balance printed on the last page was just under $400,000. I had been planning to give it to him as a wedding gift. I had been planning to explain it at the table, to watch his face when he understood what it was. That was what Amanda had slid back to me without looking. That was what she had called unnecessary. I put the passbook back in the envelope. I thought about Patricia and the restructuring we had discussed. Then I thought about Marcus at my kitchen sink, rinsing the blue-flowered cups with the careful hands of someone who had been taught by the women in his life to leave things cleaner than he found them. I called Patricia again. The account in Marcus's name, I said. Leave it. Don't touch it. A small pause. Okay, she said. But I want to add something to it. Monthly. Going forward. She didn't ask why. She just said, How much? I told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with a warmth she rarely showed, Dorothy, that's very generous. It's not generosity, I said. It's an investment. He's going to be worth it. Amanda called me 6 days before the wedding. I don't know what Marcus told her or how he told her, but her voice on the phone was careful in a way it had never been before. She asked if I would still be coming. She asked if I was all right. She said, and she stumbled over this part, which I thought was actually to her credit, that she had been thoughtless at the party and she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I would be at the wedding. And I was. I wore my best dress, a deep blue that I had tailored myself because no one does alterations the way I do. I sat in the third row. I watched my nephew stand at the altar with the careful happiness of someone who has recently been frightened and is grateful to still be standing. I watched Amanda look at him the way people look at things they are still learning the full value of. The reception was at a different restaurant than Ardmore. Less performance, more warmth. Someone had put wildflowers on the tables. The music was better. At dinner, Amanda's father Richard sat 2 seats from me. He made conversation the way he always did, broad and surface level, referencing projects and developments in neighborhoods I had never visited. At some point, the man to his left asked him what was new in commercial real estate, and Richard mentioned that there was a building on Birchwood Avenue he had been trying to acquire for the past 2 years. Great location, underused, held by some private LLC that wouldn't sell. Frustrating situation. He said, owner won't even take a meeting. The man to his left asked if he had any idea who it was. Richard shook his head. Some old family LLC. Nobody can get a name. I lifted my water glass. I did not say anything. I watched the wildflowers on the table and thought about my mother and her blue cups and the things she always told me about money and silence and how both of them, handled well, were forms of power, Across the room, Marcus caught my eye. He raised his glass toward me. Just slightly. Just enough. I raised mine back. The building on Birchwood is still mine. The account in Marcus's name is still growing. I still go to work at Henderson's 4 days a week because I have spent 31 years there, and the smell of the steam press is, by now, something close to home. Gail tells me the podiatry practice has settled in nicely on the second floor. Sometimes, when I am locking up in the evening, I stand outside on the sidewalk in front of the building and look up at it. 11,000 square feet. 3 stories. It does not look like much from the outside. It looks like a dry cleaner with some office space above it. It looks like the kind of thing you would pass without noticing. That, I have always thought, is exactly the point. You want to know what the real gift was? It was not the account. It was not the building or the fund or the number Patricia reads to me on those quarterly calls. The real gift was the lesson my mother gave me when I was young enough to use it. She said, build quietly, give freely, and let people show you who they are before you show them who you are. She said the order mattered. She said most people got it backwards. She was right. She was almost always right. And to you, wherever you are listening to this, if someone in your life is looking through you instead of at you, don't perform for them. Don't explain yourself. Don't hand them the passbook and wait for the reaction. Just keep building. Keep adding to the account. Let time do the translation. The truth has a way of arriving eventually, and it is almost always worth the wait. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Crystal Revenge and leave me a comment. I read every one. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Tell me below.